This is Critical Nonsense, our high lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, it's just me and Joey talking about why we can't 100% like anything, and also about our ideal future cities.
Woo! And this is what it sounds like. No, hold on. I'm not gonna go there. This is just what a Joey sounds like. For some reason, the Tim and Eric. This is what a dude sounds like when he walks. Doom to the doom doom. This is what that dude sounded like when he walked. Ding to the ding ding. This is what a Joey sounds like, and this is what an executive producer and petite feet Jess Vander sounds like. I don't know. Petite feet. That's what the song was called from Tim and Eric. This is what an executive producer and my personal superhero, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Wow, thanks, Joey. Hi, this is Jess. One of these days, I'll get, at best, 1 out of every 10 of your initial references, but for now, it's a solid 1 out of 60 that I get.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
I don't know why. I was saying, like, this is what a Joey sounds like in my head, and then somehow landed on that Tim and Eric song from, like, 2000.
Thanks for being vulnerable. It takes a lot.
Yeah. This is where I'm at. I don't even know if it's vulnerability. I think it is just chaos.
Yeah.
No housekeeping. As always, we're here. Do the things. Give us 5 stars or something. You know, maybe 4.
Give us, yeah. I mean, look, we're not telling you what to do. So if you're feeling 4, 5, one of those 2.
Yeah.
Then you should review.
You have options. We also, the show is on YouTube for captions and accessibility. And it's there. So you can find us. Yes. I'm sad that I'm the consistent thread here, and you and Aaron are just coming in and out of my lives lately, but you know, I'll come to terms with it.
Look, we'll take what we can get.
That said,
I'm sorry.
I was perusing the internet, you know.
Classic.
As you do, just hanging around perusing. And I came across a funny tweet.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt you because did you know people use perusing as to mean lightly scanning something when perusing actually means to deeply review and like process something? And
I was
found
deeply
that
reviewing and processing.
In my mind, you were deeply reviewing and processing.
Yeah.
But this is, anyway, I just thought as our language person that you might appreciate that. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I was both lightly scanning and deeply processing simultaneously. You know, I'm a man of many strengths. I came across a funny tweet on this account that I follow on Twitter called Dudes Posting Their W's. It was, we'll put it in the show notes. I sent it to my family because they also appreciate the humor. It was just 3 pictures, one of a map going from Poo Poo Trailhead to Pee Pee Creek, and then a picture of a guy with his bike at Poo Poo Trailhead, and a picture of a guy with his bike at Pee Pee Creek. And this account is just like a silly thing, but it's also sort of just like generally like earnest and sweet. But I'm a little conflicted about the account because occasionally something instead of like, you know, guy, you know, firefighter in Italy saves a cat and cries, and it's just like earnest, sweet things. There's like occasionally like, this dude vigilante murdered someone in Russia and the court said it was okay. I'm like, that's like not my vibe. Not following the account for vigilante murder. That's, you know, not my scene. But it made me think a lot about like, can you 100% like anything? And it feels like right now, sort of, I don't know whether collectively or just sort of like what some of like the larger pressing narratives are saying, and it's not actually like a collective sentiment, but it feels like there's this idea of like you either are all in or all out on things. And I'm like, I'm about, let's call it 85% in on dudes posting their W's, where it's just like sweet things of like, guy met a girl and then they got married 7 years later. And it's like, oh, that's nice, right? Like, a good wholesome moment. But my question to you is, why do we need to be 100% in on everything?
I mean, to be clear, I am not 100% in on a bike trek from Poo Poo Trailhead to Pee Pee Creek. Which also... Are
you 100% out on it?
No, I don't know anything about the background.
I appreciate his exercise journey.
I don't know where those names come from, and I don't want to infantilize them. And like, I guess in part that is part of the thing that you're getting after, which is like with the awareness of context and also our awareness of our inability to ever know a full amount about anything can make this binary of like being all in or being all out really confusing, because like that's just not how complexity and like our world works. If anything, you bringing this up, which by the way, I'm pretty sure men sharing their W's is like win, like a
win.
Success. Okay. So like this is just one of so many different evidences of like people confronting complexity and not knowing how to feel about that, and like the emoji swath of thumbs up and thumbs down and a few other faces are like insufficient for the very complicated feelings we might have when experiencing something of like, oh, that's funny, wait, but also this like questioning period, and then like maybe I can't like that at all, and then never mind what I thought I totally liked, I don't like anymore, and everyone is going through this process over and over and over again. I feel like what began as you scrolling the internet for things that were light and fun is actually an existential question on how we consume anything.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's there was that at some point we had spoken about Tressie McMillan Cottom, and how she, there was a thing she had said where it's like, you don't have to like everything someone does. You can be like, this person is very much in the pocket 80% of the time, and they're out of pocket 20% of the time. And like those two things can exist at the same time. But I think, as we go through all of the sort of self-reflection on systems and whatever, I think there's like an orientation of like not being able to sort of, I guess, using Tressie's language to be able to have like thick conversations about something, right? There's like a thinning of the conversation to narrow in.
Yeah, we've talked about that, right? But at the same time, I guess like the unique element to me and what you're bringing up is this piece about like then just trying to decide, okay, so like how do I feel, and like do I like that, do I not like that, and that we are, I think the interesting thing especially online is that we're being asked to decide if we like it or not. Like literally it's like, yeah, thumbs up,
it's a binary.
Heart, do you like it or not? Boo, I don't like it.
No, I think that's super. And I had not thought about this through that context of like, I guess in a lot of places it is still a binary, right? Like Instagram or Twitter or I think TikTok, right? It's like that gets a heart or it doesn't.
Or a force positive one, right? Like there was a huge controversy for the longest time of like whether to even add a negative feeling reaction, because it's like, ooh, do we want to facilitate that I don't like it energy?
Facebook, again, I haven't used Facebook in a long time, but I know that I think right before I stopped using it, it had expanded its reaction, so it's not like fully a binary, or I guess LinkedIn also has sort of like multiple different types of positive responses to things. It's like a contextualized positive affirmation of something, but it's also saying like, I like this, or I celebrate this, or I, support or praise this or whatever. But that idea of like pushing something into a binary by giving it a like or not is sort of like, I ascribe to this or not. There was always the in like early Twitter days, there's a big thing where like, and it still shows up in people's bio, like RTs don't equal endorsements, right? Like RT, if I share something,
retweet.
Yeah, retweet. Like if I'm sharing something, it doesn't mean I like it or I support the person. It just means it's a thing that exists in the world and people should be aware of it or something. But that idea of needing to be able to have sort of a blanket, a blanket value judgment that is sort of all encompassing, it is this like interesting impulse. And I feel myself in it, right? Like that question of like, what does it say about me if I'm a person who follows dudes posting their W's and like, does that mean I need to like all of these things? And I don't know. And like some of these are positive, and but like going through that continued calculation of like of needing to know. Also, it feels like an impulse. Like if I'm going to choose to whatever, give it a thumbs up or follow an account or watch a show or become a subscriber to a newsletter or buy a book, do I need to then sort of know the full context of everything before I can participate in the consumption of one thing?
Yeah, in another way of saying that to me is like, by now having even witnessed anything, I have to have a clear opinion about my overall impression, which is different of like, how do you feel about that or what do you think about it? It was, I went to the MoMA not too long ago for the first time in a really long time and was reminded at how much I love museums for exactly this reason, which to me, like the ideal museum experience is going through and being like, not just like, I like that picture and I don't like that picture. This one is pretty and this one is stupid. But it's sort of like, what I like about this is that blank, or I'm feeling really disturbed by the way this form looks like eerily real and maybe not.
You're in the uncanny valley.
Right, exactly. And that all of those don't have to mean more than just exactly that fleeting thought, and that you don't necessarily have to formulate anything stronger, like the implication of that in terms of how I feel about X artist or Z whatever. It just, the being made to have an opinion as sort of like the sum up takeaway, and also having to force that even when you might not have enough information yet. Like you had said something about you were following this account and you're still like, the jury is out on whether you think it's good or not.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I don't agree with everything that this account is posting, but I have it in my feed because I'm following like, scientists and economists and like news things that are about politics or whatever. And so it is sort of like a balancing of those interactions where I'm, using Twitter in some ways to get exposure to ideas and culture and whatever. But like sometimes that can be dark, and it's nice to just put like a sweet, earnest thing or follow like a comedy account or whatever to balance those things out. And so the dynamic then becomes, I'm going to call out, there was a edit there because my daughter came into the room. So we're just going to pick back up. I think a lot of this is interesting because of the ways in which we're internalizing content as a marker of identity, which I wasn't thinking about before this, but I was like, earlier I said, what does it say about me that I'm a person who follows dudes posting their W's, right? Like, I think if someone looked at my list of followers, they would make some value judgment about me, right? Yeah. And so this idea of like what shows I watch, whatever, is like in some ways telling about me. Now everything that I consume, I'm putting through the lens of like, is this a marker of my identity? Which doesn't necessarily feel like the right way that we should be consuming things.
For sure. It makes me feel like what you're craving is a kind of consumption privacy that evokes that whole period where people freaked out on Spotify when they realized that people could see all of the songs they were listening to and were like, oh no, they know I like NSYNC a lot on repeat. Oh
yes, I listened to Nickelback today.
Exactly. Like, what are you going to say about it? But I guess one thing that makes me feel like that is not necessarily going to be something that goes away is the extent to which, like, I feel like, let's say we're just talking about digital stuff. Are acknowledging the way that people consume requires a kind of trial. For instance, even the funniest thing, I don't know if you've seen like the Play Something feature on Netflix, which is just like, you might spend way too long scrolling looking for the thing to watch. So let's just throw back to the good old cable days where you just play something. Anything. Yeah. Just
I don't
put something on.
It.
And if you don't like it, that's fine, but at least we're getting you started so that you can watch, and then you can make that choice. Because again, I think it's just such a small microcosm of the broader issue, which is like, you don't have enough information to make a call on whether you like it, let alone whether you even want to consume it and then decide later if you like it. It's just like all the way back at the beginning, like upstream is this like crazy withholding. And again, that's why I'm more optimistic that hopefully acknowledging this, it will be easier for products, companies, whatever, to try and encourage people to be like, don't freak out, just like watch a thing, just follow this feed and unfollow it later if you find that it's not working for you.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny, like thinking about do you need to like everything or whatever is sort of obviously a leading question in that, like, I don't 100% like anything, which feels like probably where everyone is. And yet there is sort of this created impulse within sort of, whether it's the culture wars or just sort of the moment that we're in, I don't know. And maybe this is like an age-old thing, but it feels, at least in some ways, new to me. I don't feel like I felt that way when I was younger. Like, it was fine when you owned like shitty DVDs and you had like a DVD rack, and it was just like, here's like, there's some good movies in there and there's some shitty things because I bought them because I didn't know what it was before, and I didn't like read 75 Rotten Tomatoes reviews before I bought it. I got it at like a $4 bin at Walmart, and it was a movie, and I watched that movie that day,
Yeah.
And maybe not having to, it is, you mean, it's like the lean back versus lean forward type of thing. And so much of the ways and places in which we've got the lean back versus lean forward that, like you were saying, like cable TV used to be more of a lean back experience, but today, because people cut the cord and went to streaming services and requires a moment of decision to pick what you're going to watch, right? Like, you have to make that active choice, then some sort of like identity marker has to come into it versus like, oh, I just watched Saving Silverman on Comedy Central last night because it was on. So I don't have to be like, that was my decision. It was just, I turned on the TV.
It just happened to me. Oh no.
And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my choice. So it doesn't say anything about me.
Doesn't reflect anything about me. All right. Instead of wrap up corner, can we attempt to think of what is the thing that to the closest 100% that we like?
Ooh.
What's 99% something you like?
I mean, I probably could have said The Great British Baking Show, and then I watched the opening intro to the 9th season that just went up with the most cringy Billy Ray Cyrus rendition of like Achy Breaky Tart or something like that. And I was like, you just lost so many points. You are no longer a kiss on the forehead.
Wow, harsh. Brutal.
The rest of the show was good, but that opening sequence definitely dropped it down some points. Do you have a thing where you're like, yeah, no, I always like this.
I always like that. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about it earlier, but is it like it's got to be ice cream related? It's probably is it a strawberry milkshake? Is it a waffle cone? Like
it doesn't really count. That's not content related.
Why not?
Just be like, I love pizza. I mean, pizza is
like 100%.
Pretty high on my approval ratings.
There can be misses. Some people love that artificial strawberry flavor, and you hate to be surprised by something like that. There might be too many ice crystals because strawberries are, have a lot of water content.
Does Ryan Reynolds count?
Ryan Reynolds, 99% stan of Ryan Reynolds.
A friend sent a text earlier this week that was like, I watched this new Ryan Reynolds movie, and to be completely honest, I'm the type of person who would buy Ryan Reynolds floss if it was available, but it was a pretty good movie. I really liked it. It was fun. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. Ryan Reynolds has a pretty high approval rating. I mean, there are other people in the things they create where I'm like, yeah, that's great. I like that.
Yeah. Even if it's bad, I'm supporting you in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll leave it at that. Ryan Reynolds. And waffle cones.
That sounds like a pretty good Saturday.
Yep.
Are you ready to think about the future of cities?
Oh, God. We're double serious today.
I don't think this is serious. I don't know if that first one was serious. Thoughts. We're talking about dudes posting their W's in Poo Poo Point Trailhead and Pee Creek.
I guess. Well, that's a you thing. That's it.
Yeah.
That's a you joke.
That's a me. So there's been a bunch of conversation and I mean, ongoing. It's not a new conversation, but there have been a few things that have happened recently that have brought up sort of conversations about housing and city planning and what does the future of cities look like. California passed SB 8, passed a number of housing propositions that would sort of expand the availability of housing and the construction of new housing. SB 8 was about sort of allowing single-family home or single-family zoning to be like duplexes and things like that. A big expansion in the availability of housing in California, which has been a big problem. But there have been a bunch of stories recently about NEOM, this Saudi Arabian mega city project that would be like a $500 billion project to sort of design a future city that would help break Saudi Arabia's dependency on oil. I'm sure there's a lot more context that I'm very much unaware of around that conversation, but it's been getting sort of like the headline treatment.
Is it a real thing, or it's like a theoretical project getting a lot of noise?
I think it is somewhere in between right now. I think it's like a theoretical project that is progressing towards the possibility of actually being designed. I think it is like more than just someone doing like a spec project of like what could happen. But then there's also another project that I encountered today, which again, I'm not sure how far along in the progress this is, in Vancouver, where the Squamish Nation has parcels of land within the sort of center of Vancouver, which is also having sort of a lot of like housing and density crises. The cost of living in Vancouver is extremely high, and the availability of housing is pretty low. And this project is around, creating what is described as Hong Kong density level of housing in particular parcels of land that sort of break from the ways in which we would think about a normal city, right? 90% less parking than required by law in the rest of the city because the Squamish Nation owns this land, and because it's, I guess potentially, similar to the U.S., how we would talk about the sort of separation of laws on Indian reservations and how they're allowed to govern themselves. I think this is sort of a similar proposition within Vancouver, but it's been making me think a lot about what is the future of cities, because we went into sort of the pandemic where there was this exodus from cities when people got scared, at least in the US. I don't know if that was something that happened equivalently globally, but where people were moving to smaller cities or other places. And now it's starting to swing back. And so my question for you, Jess, is what do you want the future of cities to be?
Wow. What do I want? I want more Ryan Reynolds and more waffle cones.
So you're signing on to any Ryan Reynolds future development project?
Development sounds great.
I mean, he owns a gin brand,
entrepreneur,
and a cell phone company. Apparently, I mean, if anyone can do it, it's Ryan Reynolds. Apparently,
or Shaq, given both of
Shaq.
their histories.
If those two get together,
whoa! Imagine, that's
there's
no what I want.
Stopping them. And the level of snark, I would probably not want to be around the two of them at the same time because I know I'm getting dragged.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know. Comedically, it would be incredible to try to keep up with that. The question is interesting because what I would want, or even what any one person would want, is up against most of the time a ton of constraint of what one has to work with in building a city, or as probably is more common, expanding a city. It's really, I mean, this example that you give is really interesting. I don't know anything about it, but the idea of sort of this like exemption from, predetermined constraint / I mean, it's not even just exemption. It's just like here's a blank canvas is a very rare concept when it comes to building a city in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's just interesting to me. It's one of these things where what we know versus the conditions that we find ourselves in are very different, right? There have been a lot of people who have been studying cities now for a century, and so much has been learned about city planning. And I think because you're talking about complex systems, the sort of theory to implementation, there's always going to be a gap, right? You sort of theorize what doing X, Y, or Z thing would accomplish, and then you build a version of it, and it needs editing.
Yeah.
But so many of our settlements that exist today are, very old, right? Like that people just continue to build on top of cities that already exist, and they expand and change over time. But in the US, some of like the younger cities that are big now that we are relatively young, are like Miami, right? Is sort of like a cultural and financial capital of a region, but is like relatively young. It was built up very much in the last century. And so this idea of like, we know all of these things, right? And we're experiencing things now during the pandemic in like New York City where it's like, oh, it's great to have like al fresco dining, right? Like have dining outside during the months where that's nice is like fantastic. And it was, produced as like a product of necessity. Restaurants couldn't be open with indoor dining. And so the city sort of bent in this moment, and everyone's like, do we want to go back to that?
Great. Yeah, exactly.
There's so much experimentation where like this sort of exigent circumstance is creating a reevaluation, and you're seeing these projects come up like the Squamish Nation project, or a lot of like reevaluations of laws, whether it's some of these props in California or other things of like, well, we know that if you do urban density the right way, it can make cities walkable and healthier and better community. Yeah. But to go from, we're in a weird city that was designed like for cars in the middle of last century to a city that is more livable, like that transition is really crazy. And so I don't know what I want, but it feels like we're in this moment where it's like there's something better. Like a lot of like, I can start like greener, like more plants sounds good. More sounds good. Like public shared outdoor spaces sounds good. Like more parks, like fewer cars, like all of those things sound good. But this idea, this sort of, even in your question, right, of like, is this like a pure sci-fi project in this like Neom city in Saudi Arabia, or is like that going to be a real thing? Is like, it feels like you ask that because there are so many of these historical things where someone's like, here's a great idea, just need to get
just has
$500 billion to build
somehow.
it.
Yeah, right. Or a ton of money, or someone is going to have to be taken away from their homes times the hundreds of thousands of people. And so actually, no, it's not going to happen because we can't displace those people. And I feel like it's the practical constraints. This is why, like I was mentioning before we recorded, that over last weekend, I went on this architecture tour in Chicago and learned, I didn't know anything about how Chicago was built up as a city, but that the fire that happened almost 200 years ago basically created this really unique circumstance where Chicago had basically a blank slate to rethink how it should be constructed as a city and what it wants some of those bones to be. And had a huge flock of architects who came to the city to try to figure out what in their heart of hearts they wish a city would look like, which is why, one of Chicago's innovations beyond just the skyscraper I learned was that like triple layering of the city, which is a nightmare for a bird's eye view Google Maps to navigate around, but basically where there is the under layer of the city where all of the waste trucks and other mechanical things that you don't want to see or need to have interfering with day-to-day traffic is on the bottom. And then you have express traffic in the midsection, and then you have local traffic and walkways on the top. And it's like, of course, yes, like that as a way to flow traffic and mobility through a city makes a ton of sense, because you're matching speeds, pace, and like generally how people are even spending time. Just function and movement. And it's just like, yeah, except when you look at a city like New York, whose subway systems are already super old, it's like, what do we do with that? How, like, we already have blank. So now how are we supposed to reimagine and reinvent when we have to deal with what we've got?
Yeah. Do you know the what is now a concept called like retrofuturism? Are you familiar with this?
I feel like I've heard of this when it comes to fashion, but tell me more.
It was, I think people have like talk about it both in like an aesthetic and a style, but it was sort of the middle of last century where there was this like big sort of forward-looking envisioning moment, and maybe it was because
like
America. Yeah, the Jetsons fit into this category. A lot of like what Walt Disney was doing, and he had projects that were about future cities, like Epcot Center and sort of that whole region was sort of oriented towards it. I think they had plans to build one of these sort of like future city concepts in Florida at some point. But there's this big moment of like looking forward and imagining what the future could be like and mean for your sort of everyday living situation. And it feels like at some point we got away from that, either because, the suburbs got built or new cities got built, or, maybe it was sort of the fear of the Cold War or other concepts sort of got in the way that had us stopping imagining. But it's interesting that that's happening again now in some capacity, that you're seeing and hearing about more of these, like, what could it look like? And I'm curious if it's because, whether it's for the same reasons, right, that, maybe there is some kind of optimism that's back because of technology or something like that, or, at that point, so much was getting built and it felt like we could make it do anything in sort of the 50s or 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe even in the US. Or if today it's a very different tension, right? Like we're dissatisfied with the conditions that we created and now we want to change them, but it's being manifested in
something similar.
This futurism concept.
Yeah, I feel like if I'm hearing you correctly, it's basically like there was this period of time where people were super idealistic and were like, wow, there's like so much potential in our future and let's just imagine it. And I don't know, we've got way too much money to just like try it out. And then a wave of pragmatism hit and whatever, like, doing what made the most sense for what we needed in the moment. And I feel like this, what you're describing as like the new, maybe a new wave of creative inspiration or idealism is more born out of necessity again, but in the context of like, for climate reasons, we need to be able to imagine more sustainable cities and are already too late. So it's almost like, how can we catch up on that? Like, let's actually think about that again. What do we do? What do we do when we have so many people and not enough places for them to be? Let's rethink housing and how that looks. Like, I think you're right. It presents similarly, but the driving reason behind it feels like there's a lot of stuff and then now competing for what is the most important thing to address first.
Yeah, and maybe in a weird sort of silver linings type of way, so much of the reappraisal that's happening right now, where systems that you thought were so static are being broken down by the conditions of the pandemic, right? Like our ways of working look different, right? This idea of like distributed work or hybrid models are sort of unthroning and unseating these constructs that we felt like were impossible to break, right? We had been in that mode for so long, certainly like all of our lifetimes, that was the construct of work. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, maybe that could be different. Maybe you don't have to go into the location of your job and still do things and be productive and blah, blah, blah. The idea that like these old systems are breaking is maybe sort of creating like well, if that can break, can we break this?
What about other stuff?
Yeah, what about other stuff? Is everything as like not as static as we think it is and like it's only there because of inertia?
Yeah, and maybe not even all of those things are that old. Like the modern office, like open office, high rise thing is like it's not that old, but it took hold so quickly and almost just like kept building and layering on top. And so I feel like the visual in my head that you're getting at is like, if you just like take enough of the Jenga pieces away, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Is the Jenga of how we've designed our cities, like maybe we can just do something else.
It's interesting too for that reason. Like the Jenga piece thing is like the systems that get produced of like why cities wind up looking the way they are or why they're constructed is because of some set of ordinances or rules you put in place that then historically have been so like incalcitrant, right? Like it's difficult to change those things theoretically. And then an event like the pandemic happens and a bunch of them change really quickly in response. And you're like, oh, wait, maybe it's not that hard. Maybe we just change the rules, right? Like that it is a system and that like by adjusting these things, you can make sort of a better, more equitable, like more comfortable, more sort of like sustainable way of living. And so the I guess, you know, where this is all seems to be going is like, oh shit, maybe we can have a new version of like futurism that isn't just imagination. And, you know, if you ever get a chance, just type in retrofuturism in Google Images and just like scroll through the images.
Experience.
It's just like delightful. There's like, I'm looking at a picture of what looks like the Titanic flying through the air over like a jungle scene, like the absurd, or you know, like trains going through the ocean. You know, like you sort of take the concept of like how you understand a thing in its present and try to extend it into the future, and it just doesn't work.
But it's like Zootopia, but for humans.
Or steampunk.
Says a young person.
Yeah.
Wow. This is really a rabbit hole. Also, like cars, speaking of that MoMA visit, there's like a whole thing about cars during this time and like cars specifically being symbolic of this period. Now I'm jogging my memory of like, wow, imagine what this could be. And like this like spaceship like pod that can, you know, for now be on the ground, but in the future, now look at every single sci-fi movie ever is like it's flying and
I mean, you wind up thinking through the lens of the prevalent technology of your time
today,
right?
Exactly.
Like this picture of like the high-speed railway in the ocean was from like 1931 when train travel was sort of the prominent means of fast travel, or this picture of a hotel on rails from 1898 is like, again, the train was sort of this prominent thing. And where you look at like the futurism of the 50s, it was very car centric, of like stacked different types of highways in a city like you were talking about, with like the pedestrian walkways on the top with like greenery and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm just excited by it, I guess, is why I wanted to talk about this. So I was like, oh, wow. Also, insight into me is like, oh, people are breaking the rules and it's like cool things are happening. I like this.
Your favorite. If that is the only way to wrap up this whole thing is like, Joey's excited. The rules are being broken on how to make cities. And he is sharing that joy with all of us.
Thank you, Squamish Nation in Vancouver. Nation. I hope your city project gets built.
This it looks incredible. How amazing is that? You have to check out the pictures.
Yeah, all of the things too just like look better, right? It's like there are plants growing off your buildings. It's like, oh, dope! I want plants growing off my building.
Why don't we have more green roofs? Yeah, it's true.
Anyways, the future is coming.
The future is here? It already
happened? Is that the wrap-up corner?
I don't know. That's the wrap-up corner.
And it's about to be the future now. 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 Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Future Ice Cream. Not to be confused with astronaut ice cream. It's something different.
It's in the future. As always, we'd like to thank you, executive producer and Ice Cream of the Future, Jess Vander.
Thanks, Joey. I personally would like to extend gratitude to sound engineer and futuristic filmmaker visionary Alex Contel. Congratulations on your latest project, Alex. You should share it in the show notes.
Yeah, Alex just got into a big film festival with a documentary he produced. So shouts. We'll cover that more. As always, we definitely need to thank programming coordinator, magician, DJ Lil Tiger, aka Les Jacobs.
And we must thank our production help and people we 100% like, 100% sure. Sorry, Gilbert, and Nora Mastrovich.
And as always, thanks, Helen.
Thanks.
Special thanks, Dippin' Dots.
Yeah.
Still like it. It's not ice cream, but there's a place for it, you know?
Yeah, although did you know that there's now generic brand Dippin' Dots? I wonder if their copyright expired or their patent, or I don't know, whatever it was. I don't know if it expired, but I recently witnessed generic brand Dippin' Dots and I was like, what? No. I don't know if anyone's interested.
It's just Dippin' Dots for the masses.
Yeah.
Cut out the middleman. The ice cream of the future is probably not dairy, so it's not cream. It's iced grain or iced nut juice.
Iced nut juice. Can we just have something else? Now you're just describing a popsicle. I feel like a popsicle could be anything, or a sorbet could be anything.
Some of the oat and cashew based vegan ice creams are legit, like
good,
effectively or close to indistinguishable. Like they're getting close.
Indistinguishable insofar it is a similar experience, but like not the same flavor. I guess
it's not the same flavor. I think texture is really the holy grail within ice cream.
Speaking of texture, speaking of ice cream, I'd like to thank Smitten with the glottal stomp. Smitten, a liquid nitrogen based San Francisco ice creamery that has developed the ultimate ice cream technique in small batches. And I'm waiting until they come to New York one day and set up shop here, because it's really something else. It's like the texture you associate with gelato, but it's ice cream, because they can make these minimal ice crystals, which most of the time ice cream you assume it has these like really big fluffy ice crystals, but man, it's divine. If you're out west, you should go and experience Smitten for sure.
Also, semi-Freddo.
Tell me about that. What's a semi-Freddo?
I think it's semi-frozen. I think that's what that means.
A partially frozen Italian dessert. Is it any dessert that is half frozen? No.
No, it's basically ice
cream.
It's
a mousse-ish. Moussey.
I've not had a ton of it in my life. I've had it in sort of like a fancy restaurant type of situation.
Yeah.
Passion fruit semi-Freddo, though.
Ooh,
what a game changer.
We love passion fruit as a flavor. Special thanks to passion fruit as a flavor.
Big shouts.
Although not really, like no thanks to passion fruit as a raw fruit, because that is slimy.
It's slimy and crunchy in ways that the crunch, I'm not vibing with it.
Yeah. But we'll look past that. I still 88% love passion fruit because the flavor is the most important thing.
Yeah, we're there for it. All right, thanks passion fruit. Thanks Jess.
Thanks Joey. This was fun.
Thanks for listening.
And also all you guys. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye. I love you.
Okay, bye. See you.
Why do we need to be 100% in on everything?